Elias, a runaway slave with blood on his hands and chains still fresh around his ankles, sprinted through the trees, his lungs burning, his feet raw. But he wasn't running for himself. Just steps behind him, stumbling over roots and gasping for air, was a young white woman in a torn wedding dress, her belly round with child. Her sobs were barely louder than the storm. She had no business being out here, and Elias had no reason to help her, except for the look in her eyes. That look of helplessness, of hope. They had one shot at freedom, together, but the men chasing them had other plans. And the South never forgave those who crossed its lines, especially not for love. Who was this mysterious bride? Why was she running? And what price would Elias pay for choosing her over his own escape? Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Tomorrow, I've saved something extra special just for you. The year was 1857. The American South simmered like a pot ready to boil over. Cotton was king, and slavery was its iron crown. In the heart of Georgia, on the outskirts of a plantation called Cold Creek Hollow, a man named Elias lived in the shadows, first as a possession, then as a ghost. Elias had once been called good stock by his master. Broad-shouldered, quiet, obedient. But there was always something behind his eyes, a question, a fire, something that made overseers uneasy. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words were measured, deliberate. That silence held secrets, pain he never voiced, and a memory he carried like a stone. The last time he saw his younger sister, Ruth, being sold to a stranger in Charleston. He had been just 15. He never forgave himself for not stopping it. Now, at 30, Elias was a runaway, slipping through forests and swamps under cover of darkness. His clothes were torn, his boots stolen. He lived off roots and stolen bread. But he moved like a man with purpose, not fear. The Georgia countryside was cruel and beautiful. Rolling fields of cotton swayed in the wind, bordered by thick forests and winding rivers that knew the names of those who never made it across. Small towns dotted the map, each with its own sheriff, each with a bounty board nailed to a post. And on more than one of those boards, someone had scribbled in rough charcoal, Elias, wanted alive, $500 reward. The laws were clear. Slaves were property. Helping one escape meant jail, or worse. And yet Elias had found help in strange places. A preacher who gave him water, a boy who offered his coat, a widow who said nothing when she saw muddy footprints on her porch. But it was trust Elias could never afford. Not anymore. Then came the woman. He first saw her in the woods, her dress torn at the hem, veil hanging from one side of her head like a broken promise. She looked like a ghost from a story, pale skin muddied with dirt, blonde hair stuck to her face with rain, her hands trembling over her belly. You have to help me," she whispered, though she could barely stand. "They're going to kill me." Elias hesitated. Every instinct screamed no. A white woman in a wedding dress was the kind of trouble that got men lynched. But something in her voice, raw, shaking, and not yet broken, made him pause. Her name, she said, was Annabelle Monroe, daughter of a wealthy landowner, promised to a man twice her age. But she had run, because the child inside her wasn't his. And now, her family wanted her gone, quietly. They were two fugitives from different worlds, bound by the same thing, a choice that defied everything around them. As they moved deeper into the forest together, small moments said more than words. Elias watched her struggle to walk and offered a hand. She flinched, then took it. She saw the scars on his back and said nothing, but her eyes softened. There were things neither said aloud. Elias never mentioned the scar on his neck shaped like a brand that didn't match the one of his last master. And Annabelle never explained who the real father of her baby was. But the woods had a way of listening, and secrets always found their voice. The deeper they went, the more the world closed in. The air grew thicker, the silence louder. And somewhere in that silence, something stirred, something that would not let them go without a fight. Because in a land built on chains and silence, love was the greatest rebellion of all. By the second night, the forest had turned from shelter to trap. The trees seemed closer, the shadows heavier. Elias and Annabelle moved quietly, their feet sinking into wet earth with every step. The moon had vanished behind thick clouds, and the only sound was the rustle of branches and Annabelle's labored breathing. She was slowing down. Elias paused near a fallen log, scanning the trail behind them. He knew this land, the hunting routes, the slave catchers who patrolled at night, the whistle signals passed between dogs and men. He also knew they were getting close to a crossroads, a narrow path that led either toward the river or toward Cold Creek Hollow, the very plantation Elias had escaped from. He crouched to study the dirt. Tracks, heavy boots. At least 3 men. Headed their way. "They're tracking us," he said under his breath. Annabelle leaned against a tree, one hand on her stomach, her face pale. I can't keep going like this." Elias looked at her, then back at the tracks. He had a choice. Keep dragging her along and risk both their lives, or hide her and draw the men away. He made his decision. "There's a hollow up ahead," he whispered. "A place I know. You'll be safe there while I lead them the wrong way." Her eyes widened. "You'll come back?" He didn't answer. Instead, he pressed something into her hand, a small carved wooden cross, worn smooth from years of rubbing. "My sister made this," he said. "Keep it close." Before she could speak, he was gone. Elias doubled back toward the path. He moved with the silence of a ghost, sticking close to the underbrush. Minutes later, he saw them, 3 white men, armed, muddy, their hounds sniffing the ground with purpose. One of them, Burke, was familiar, a hunter from Cold Creek Hollow, tall, mean-eyed, with a long rifle and a smile like a wolf. Burke had been the one who used to beat Elias for walking too slow. Now he was grinning, pointing at a broken branch. "They're close," he spat. "She can't run fast. And that boy she's with, Elias, always thought he was too quiet for his own good." They weren't just after Annabelle. They were after him. Elias gritted his teeth. He could hear their boots drawing closer. He waited for the right moment, then snapped a branch and ran. The dogs barked. Gunshots rang through the trees. He ducked, weaving between trunks, drawing the men away from the hollow. Bullets tore through bark. One grazed his arm. He stumbled but kept running, until he reached a rocky slope and let himself fall, sliding down into the ravine below. Silence. Elias lay still in the mud, blood soaking through his sleeve. Above him, he heard Burke's voice. "Let him bleed. He won't make it far. We'll get the girl first." Their footsteps moved away. He had succeeded, but at a cost. Lying there in the dark, Elias realized the stakes had shifted. This wasn't just about survival anymore. He couldn't run forever. He had to fight. For her, for the child, and for a life no one had ever let him dream of having. His goal was clear now. Get Annabelle to the river, to the abolitionist outpost across the water. Freedom lay on the other side. But so did 100 dangers. And men like Burke would never stop hunting them. The first battle had been won, but the war had just begun. The storm passed by morning, but the forest was drenched and heavy with fog. Elias moved with a limp now, his left arm wrapped in a strip of cloth torn from his own shirt. Blood still oozed from the gunshot graze, but he didn't have time to worry about it. He had one focus, Annabelle. When he found her, huddled beneath a root-covered rock formation, her eyes widened with relief, and something else. Something softer. "You came back," she whispered. "I said I would." She looked away quickly, blinking back tears. Her hand drifted to her belly. "He never would have come back for me." It was the first time she mentioned him, the man who fathered her child. She didn't say his name, but Elias didn't need her to. Her silence said enough. Whoever he was, he had left her alone in a world ready to eat her alive. Subplot 1. Romance born from ruin. In the days that followed, Elias and Annabelle grew closer, not through grand gestures, but quiet moments. He helped her bathe in the stream, shielding her eyes when she cried from the cold. She cleaned his wound with moss and whispered prayers over it. At night, they huddled together beneath a shared wool coat, body heat and trust growing between them. But neither spoke of what waited on the other side of the river. What could a runaway slave and a disgraced bride ever have together? Still, each glance lingered a little longer. Each touch became something more. In a world that had taken everything from them, love was both a rebellion and a risk. Subplot 2. A hunter's grudge. Back in town, Burke was sharpening a knife, his eyes fixed on the bounty poster nailed to the sheriff's board. "You had him in your sights," growled Sheriff Emmett, tossing a tin cup on the table. "Now he's in the wind again." Burke didn't flinch. "He's not getting far. Elias has always been stubborn. But I know that boy. Know how he thinks. What's your stake in this?" Burke's jaw tightened. He didn't answer at first. But in his pocket, he turned a small brass locket between his fingers, a locket that once belonged to his younger brother, Samuel. Samuel, who'd been killed 2 years earlier on the same night Elias escaped Cold Creek Hollow. "They think Elias just ran. But I know better," Burke muttered. "He did something to my brother. And I'm going to carve the truth out of him if I have to." Revenge wasn't in the bounty. But for Burke, it was personal. Moral tensions, a world cracking. Whispers were spreading through the region. Rumors of abolitionist activity near the river. Secret networks moving cargo north. And questions about a wealthy plantation bride gone missing on her wedding night. Some townsfolk blamed Yankees. Others blamed demons. But one person knew more than she let on. Miss Delilah, a free black woman who ran the general store in the next town over. She had eyes everywhere and a memory like steel. When a stranger came asking questions about Elias and Annabelle, she gave them nothing but a smile and a quiet warning to her nephew, Caleb. "If those two cross the river," she said, "they'll need help. And they'll need it fast." Clues for later. Elias's wooden cross, now in Annabelle's hands, has initials carved inside. R.C. Ruth Carter, his lost sister. The brass locket Burke carries has a hidden photo inside, not of his brother, but of a black woman with kind eyes and a baby on her lap. Annabelle's unborn child kicks whenever they get close to the river, something she quietly prays over, like the water itself has meaning. As the fog began to clear that morning, Elias stared across the trees to where the land dipped and the sound of water whispered through the wind. The river was close, but so were the past, the truth, and the price of everything they were beginning to feel. The river was just a day's walk away. Elias and Annabelle reached the edge of the pine thickets by dusk. Beyond the hills, a faint shimmer in the distance hinted at moving water. Safety. Hope. Maybe even a new beginning. Elias had scouted ahead, found a narrow route down the slope, and marked the trail with small stones so Annabelle could follow slowly behind. But when he returned to where he had left her, she was gone. Panic shot through him like a whip. He dropped to his knees, searching for signs. The broken fern, a footprint, a scrap of cloth. Then he saw it, drag marks. His heart thundered. Half a mile away, Burke stood tall on a mossy ridge, one hand gripping the rope tied around Annabelle's wrists, the other holding a loaded pistol. Her cheeks were scratched, eyes blazing with fury and fear. "You've got a real talent for disappearing," Burke sneered. "But you made one mistake. You cared too much. You came back for her." He wasn't talking to Annabelle. He was talking into the woods. And Elias heard every word. From his vantage point behind a fallen cedar, Elias watched as Burke dragged Annabelle toward a tree and fastened the rope around its trunk. "You thought you could play hero," Burke called out, scanning the tree line. "But I know you, Elias. Always thought you were better than the rest of them. Quiet. Smart. But you're still a runaway slave. And I'm going to make sure you remember that." Elias knew he had to act. He had no gun, no knife, just his fists, his speed, and the forest he knew better than Burke ever would. He waited until the wind shifted, until Burke turned his back, then sprinted. In a flash, he slammed into Burke from behind. The pistol went flying. They hit the ground hard. Fists flew. Blood sprayed. Burke got a grip on Elias's wounded arm, digging his thumb into the wound. Elias howled, but he didn't stop. He wrapped his arm around Burke's throat, using leverage and fury more than strength. The older man thrashed wildly, choking, until Annabelle, eyes wild, grabbed a rock and smashed it across Burke's temple. Once, twice, silence. Burke slumped to the side, unconscious, or worse. Annabelle collapsed next to Elias, gasping. "Are you okay?" Elias coughed, nodding. "We need to move. Now." That night, they didn't go toward the river. Instead, Elias took them deep into an abandoned shack hidden in the hills, an old safe house once used by escaping slaves. Inside were remnants, a rusted lantern, a child's shoe, a water-stained map. Annabelle trembled as Elias dressed her wrist. "Why won't they stop?" she whispered. "We're not even important." Elias looked at her, eyes dark. "We are. More than you know." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of parchment, a page he had hidden since the day he escaped. It was a ledger. Names, dates, locations. Proof that Burke and others at Cold Creek had been running more than just slaves. They'd been selling children, even white ones. He handed it to her. "My sister, Ruth, she disappeared when we were kids. This is the only record that mentions her name. Burke knew more. That's why he hunted me so hard. To keep it quiet." Annabelle stared at the names. This could destroy them. Elias nodded. "But only if we live long enough to tell the story." Unbeknownst to them, Burke wasn't dead. As the firelight flickered in the shack, miles away in the mud, Burke's eyes opened. Bloodied and bruised, he staggered to his feet. Now, it was no longer about the bounty. It was about vengeance. And the game had only just changed. The cabin walls creaked as a storm rolled in over the hills. Rain beat down like fists against the roof, and lightning flashed across the sky, throwing ghostly shadows against the wooden boards. Inside, Elias paced. He couldn't sleep, couldn't stop thinking about Burke's eyes as they fought. Eyes not just full of hate, but of secrets. Something told Elias that Ledger wasn't the only thing Burke had been hiding. Behind him, Annabelle sat by the fire, rubbing her swollen belly. Her face was drawn, exhausted. She watched Elias with a mixture of fear and admiration. "You keep moving like that. You're gonna wear the floor thin," she said softly. Elias paused, then forced a half-smile. "Storm like this makes me restless." "No," she said, standing slowly. "You've been restless since we left the plantation. Since long before we met. Something's eating you." He looked away. "I know I've got no right to ask," she continued. "But if we're running together, if we're risking our lives together, maybe I deserve to know what's chasing you besides bounty hunters." A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackling fire and distant thunder. Then Elias sat down and spoke. "I wasn't born a slave," he said. "My mother was free. So was my father. We lived in a hidden settlement near the border. My sister Ruth and I grew up believing we were safe, that if we stayed quiet, stayed hidden, the world would pass us by." He paused. But it didn't. One night, riders came. Torches, guns, chains. They dragged us from our beds. My father tried to fight. He died in front of us. My mother screamed until they broke her jaw. I was 10. His voice cracked, but he continued. "They sold me south. Cold Creek Hollow. I never saw Ruth again." Annabelle's eyes were wet. "I'm so sorry." Elias shook his head. "Don't be. That night shaped me, made me see the truth. That freedom isn't given. You have to take it, and you have to fight to keep it." He looked her in the eye now. "That's why I went back. Why I risked everything when I saw you in that barn. Because no one fought for us. Not then. Not ever. Until now." Annabelle swallowed hard, trembling. "I don't deserve it. I married a man for status. Let my father control everything. I lived a life of dresses and dances while people like you bled. You bled too," Elias said quietly. "We all do, in different ways." The next morning, tensions flared again. Elias was gathering supplies, planning the safest route to the river. But Annabelle wasn't ready to move. "I can't just keep running," she said, arms crossed. "We need help. We need to tell someone what's in that ledger. And get captured before we even cross the state line?" Elias snapped. "No. We stay quiet. We move at night. You're so used to hiding, you can't see what's in front of you," she shouted. "You have proof. Names. You could end Cold Creek. Save others." "That's not the mission," Elias shouted back. "The mission is staying alive." They stood, breathless, hearts pounding. Then, softer, Annabelle spoke. "Maybe surviving isn't enough anymore." Elias turned away, jaw tight. Because she was right. And it terrified him. That night, while Elias was out gathering firewood, Annabelle found something tucked inside the ledger pages. a scrap of a torn letter written in elegant handwriting. To whoever finds this, my name was Ruth Carter. I was taken from the Freewood settlement in 1834. I was sold 3 times. I have a child now, a daughter. She has Elias's eyes. If you find this, tell my brother I remember the apple tree. And I never stopped believing he'd find me. Tears spilled onto the page. Ruth was alive. Or at least, she had been. Annabelle clutched the letter to her chest and stared into the night. Her voice trembled in the dark. Elias, you're not just running anymore. You're searching. The next morning, Elias found the letter in her hands. And something shifted inside him. I thought I was trying to escape the past, he whispered. But maybe I've been trying to go back and fix it all along. Annabelle took his hand. Then let's stop running. Let's start fighting. From that moment, the path changed. No longer just survival, but justice. And the storm was far from over. The next town was called Grayford. Nestled between 2 rivers and guarded by thick marshland, it was a place most runaway slaves avoided. Too many bounty hunters. Too many eyes. But Elias and Annabelle had no choice. She was slowing down, her ankles swelling, her breathing labored. The child was coming sooner than expected. They needed shelter. A midwife. A miracle. They reached Grayford under the cover of darkness and found a widow named Miriam who had once helped freedom seekers cross the border. She took them in, fed them, and examined Annabelle by candlelight. She's strong, Miriam said. But that child's coming fast. You'll need to stay put for at least a week. A week. Elias knew that was too long. But that wasn't the twist. The next morning, Miriam handed Elias a sealed envelope. This arrived 2 days ago, she said. Someone from Cold Creek paid a courier to distribute these to bounty offices and town marshals from here to the border. Thought you might want to see it. Elias opened the envelope, and his world shattered. Inside was a wanted poster. His face, sketched in charcoal. But it wasn't the bounty that shook him. It was the headline. Elias Carter, suspect in the abduction and planned murder of Annabelle Whitlock. Beneath it, an official script. Fugitive slave. Dangerous. Known to be armed. Believed to have kidnapped Mrs. Whitlock, wife of the late Jonathan Whitlock, now presumed dead. What the hell is this? Elias muttered, voice cracking. Annabelle read over his shoulder and turned pale. I didn't know, she whispered. I didn't. Didn't what? Elias asked, stepping back. Didn't know your father blamed me for your husband's death? Or didn't know they'd spin you into a victim and me into a killer? I swear, she cried. I left my father a letter. I told him I was leaving willingly. That I chose this. Elias backed away. Then how do they have that narrative? How do they make me the monster? Annabelle broke. Because Jonathan wasn't supposed to die. Elias froze. What? She looked up, eyes full of shame. Jonathan followed me the night I ran. He thought I was meeting someone else. When he saw me riding alone, he chased me through the woods. He tried to stop me. She swallowed. We argued. I told him I was pregnant. He snapped, grabbed my reins. The horse panicked, threw him. He hit his head on a rock. Elias stared at her, stunned. I didn't kill him, she sobbed. But I left him there. I didn't look back. The silence was deafening. The woman he had risked everything for had been hiding the one truth that changed everything. Burke hadn't been chasing them for the bounty alone. He wanted revenge for Jonathan. So did Annabelle's father. Elias had been a pawn in a family scandal they needed buried, with him as the scapegoat. His stomach turned. His mind raced. He'd been hunted not just as a runaway, but as a murderer. And now every town, every checkpoint, every eye was looking for him with bloodlust. You should have told me, he said finally. I was afraid, she whispered. Afraid you'd see me the way they do. Elias looked at her. I don't, he said. But this changes everything. Miriam stepped in, voice calm. You both need to leave before sunrise. That bounty means anyone who sees you could betray you for gold. Elias nodded, his resolve hardening. They couldn't run anymore. They had to rewrite the story that others were twisting. As they packed, Elias pulled the ledger from the satchel and looked at Ruth's name again. If the world wanted to call him a villain, then maybe it was time he became something worse in their eyes. A truth teller. A rebel. A man who burns down the system that built the lie. And as dawn broke over Grayford, Elias Carter wasn't just a fugitive anymore. He was a spark in dry grass. And the fire was coming. They left Greyford under a blood-orange sky, silence weighing heavier than their bags. The road ahead was choked with fog, but it wasn't the weather that blinded them, it was the fallout. Elias walked a few paces ahead, shoulders tense, hand never leaving the hilt of the blade he kept hidden beneath his coat. Behind him, Annabelle rode slowly, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other gripping the reins like it was the last thing holding her to the earth. The truth hung between them, raw, unspoken. Jonathan was dead, and Elias had been blamed. By noon, they stopped at a wooded clearing to rest. Elias didn't speak, just paced. Annabelle finally broke the silence. "You haven't looked at me since we left." Elias turned. "I'm trying not to see you as the reason I'm being hunted like a dog." Her lips trembled. "I never meant for this to happen. You kept it from me," he snapped. "That he died. That your father would twist the story. That I'd be branded a murderer." She stepped forward. "I was protecting us." "No," he said coldly. "You were protecting yourself. From guilt. From shame. From the truth." Their fragile alliance cracked that day, not into hate, but into something worse, distrust. Annabelle withdrew, spending more time in silence, fingers pressed to her belly, as if the child might understand the chaos around them. Elias hardened. He stopped asking what she needed, stopped explaining where they were going. He moved like a man hunted, not just by bounty men, but by betrayal. The only thing that kept them bound was the baby. That unborn life was the last thread holding them from tearing apart completely. That night, by a quiet stream, Elias pulled out Ruth's old ledger again. Its pages were smudged with dirt and grief. He traced her name with his thumb. She had once believed in hope. That a man like him could mean more than chains or papers. That justice could be carved from blood and courage. And now, Elias didn't know if he believed in anything but survival. Still, he stared at the names. Some had escaped. Others had vanished. But one, Samuel Rourke, stood out. A preacher, once a slave himself. Now a man who ran an underground church at the border, baptizing freedom into those who crossed. Ruth had once written, "If I don't make it, tell Samuel the truth about what's in these pages." Elias looked to the fire, eyes distant. Maybe this ledger wasn't just a diary. Maybe it was a map, a final mission. If they could reach Samuel, maybe Elias could clear his name. Maybe they could finally be free. But freedom felt further than ever. In the shadows of the woods, a figure watched them, silent, careful. A bounty hunter? A spy? Elias couldn't be sure. But he felt it now. The walls closing in. The game tightening. Even trust, what little remained, was turning to rust. Annabelle stood under a tree, one hand to her chest. "I loved him, you know," she said softly, as if the trees might be listening. "Not Jonathan. You. I still do." Elias didn't respond. He couldn't. Not yet. Instead, he looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since Greyford. He saw the cracks in her spirit, the fatigue, the flickering strength beneath. Maybe love wasn't gone, but it had been changed, shaped by pain and survival. Somewhere in the night, a wolf howled in the distance. And as they packed their things in silence, Elias tightened the straps on the saddle and said, without looking, "We ride at first light." He didn't say where. He didn't have to. Because now, it wasn't just about escaping chains. It was about rewriting a story before someone else finished it for them. The morning fog had burned away, leaving the land raw and wide beneath a cloudless sky. Elias and Annabelle moved with purpose, but there was no longer any pretense of quiet hope. Every step forward was weighed down with urgency, the weight of a future unknown pressing against their chests. Elias kept his gaze fixed ahead, but his mind wasn't on the road. He knew the bounty hunters were closing in. That man they'd seen watching them, he hadn't been the only one. Word would have already spread that Elias and Annabelle were no longer hiding in the shadows of Greyford. Soon, they'd be too far from any shelter. They needed a plan. Later that evening, after a long ride through dense forests and over desolate fields, they found a small abandoned cabin. A roof over their heads was a rare blessing, and they took it gratefully, though the air was thick with the tension of things unsaid. Elias sat by the fire, sharpening his knife. His hands moved mechanically, no thought, just action. It kept his mind from wandering to places he didn't want to go. Annabelle sat across from him, her eyes distant. The baby had been quiet all day, which was a relief. She still hadn't fully recovered from the emotional toll of their escape, the revelation about Jonathan's death, and the bounty now hanging over their heads. But she had shifted, no longer the vulnerable, frightened woman from Greyford. She was becoming something else, something stronger. "You still haven't told me why you're so quiet," Elias said suddenly, his voice cutting through the stillness. She looked at him, eyes narrowing. "You don't want to hear it. Try me." She hesitated, then spoke, her voice low. "I'm afraid. Afraid of what happens when we get to Samuel. Afraid that even if we make it there, the people who are hunting us won't stop. That even if we clear your name, we'll be too far gone." Elias stopped his knife mid-motion. "It's not just about clearing my name anymore." Annabelle blinked, as if trying to understand. "Then what is it about?" He met her gaze, the weight of his decision heavy in his eyes. "It's about ending this. Ending the system that made us pawns. We can't just run forever, Annabelle. I need to make sure no one else gets trapped in this game." She looked away, biting her lip. "And you think Samuel's going to help with that?" "I have to believe it," Elias said. "I don't have any other choice." Annabelle's silence lingered, but there was something softer in the way she regarded him now. No longer just the runaway slave, but a man with purpose. The man she had once thought to be her savior. Meanwhile, the tension that had festered between them was beginning to evolve into something else, something more fragile, more tender. As Elias spoke of justice, of fighting back against those who sought to control their fate, Annabelle saw him in a new light. He was no longer just the man who saved her. He was a leader, someone who could help her reclaim the life she thought she had lost. Their bond had deepened, not just from shared survival, but from the understanding that they were in this fight together. Their connection had moved beyond the physical to something more profound. But it wasn't easy. Elias couldn't forget the bitterness that clung to their past. The secrecy, the lies. Annabelle had kept too much from him, and while she had confessed the truth about Jonathan's death, there was still a feeling of betrayal in the air. Their relationship was shifting. Whether it would deepen into something more meaningful or crack apart under the weight of their individual burdens, only time would tell. In the quiet of the cabin, a sound broke the stillness, a knock on the door. Elias moved quickly, but silently. His fingers brushed the handle of the knife, ready to defend them if needed. "Who's there?" he called out, voice steady. A voice answered, low and grave. "It's Samuel Rourke." Elias's breath hitched. He hadn't expected Samuel to come this soon, but it seemed that fate had decided to intervene. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. A chance to shift the power in their favor. A chance to regain control. Annabelle looked at Elias, her expression unreadable. For a moment, the world outside the cabin ceased to exist. The fire crackled, casting shadows on their faces, as they faced the man who held the key to their future. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about changing everything. And when the door opened, it was the beginning of something much larger than either of them could imagine. The door creaked open, and Elias's heart raced. Samuel Rourke stood there, his figure silhouetted by the dim light outside. His face was older than Elias remembered, weathered, haunted, but his eyes still held the fire of rebellion. "You've come for me," Elias said, voice low but steady. There was no question in his mind now. Samuel was the answer, the hope they'd been searching for. But as Samuel stepped inside, something felt off. The air in the cabin thickened, the shadows shifting in the corners, as though the world was holding its breath. "Not just for you, Elias," Samuel said, stepping forward. His tone was almost too calm. "I'm here for her, too." Annabelle stiffened, her gaze darting between the two men. Elias felt his chest tighten. Something wasn't right. There was no welcome in Samuel's voice, no warmth. Only calculation. "What do you mean?" Elias asked, stepping in front of Annabelle instinctively. Samuel's gaze flicked to Annabelle, then back to Elias. "The truth is, I've been watching you both for some time." "Watching you, Elias? You think I'm here to help? To clear your name?" "No. I'm here for something else entirely." The words hit Elias like a punch to the gut. "You've been watching us?" Samuel's lips curled into a grim smile. "You weren't the only one running, Elias. You weren't the only one with a price on your head. I have my own debts." Annabelle took a step back, her breath coming in shallow bursts. "You're working for them. You're working for the people who want us dead." Elias's hand gripped his knife tighter. The plan was crumbling before his eyes, like dust slipping through his fingers. "No," Samuel said, his tone flat. "I'm not working for them. I'm working for myself. The air was thick with tension. Elias could feel the heat of betrayal rolling off Samuel, and it burned his skin. You sold us out. Elias spat, stepping closer to Samuel. For what? Gold? Power? You always knew I was running from a past I couldn't outrun. And now you're doing their bidding. Annabelle took another step back, eyes wide, her hands cradling her belly protectively. No, I don't believe it. You don't have to believe it, Samuel said, his voice suddenly colder. I didn't sell you out, but I'm not saving you either. You think I'm some kind of hero? No, this is about survival. I'm not going to risk everything for a man on the run and a woman who's already marked. The world doesn't work like that. And then, as if on cue, a loud crash rang through the cabin, splintering the door wide open. Figures poured in, shadows in the night. Bounty hunters. Dozens of them. Weapons drawn. Their boots stomped across the floor like thunder, and before Elias could even react, Samuel had already drawn a gun and fired. A loud, deafening shot rang through the room. Elias lunged forward, shoving Annabelle out of the way. The bullet missed him by inches, striking a beam overhead. He could feel the heat of it on his skin, the violence of it echoing through the walls. No, Elias shouted, his heart hammering in his chest. Samuel, what are you doing? Samuel stepped back, his face grim, eyes dark with something Elias couldn't quite place. Survival, Elias. You wanted revenge. But there's no time for that. I've made my choice. Before Elias could react, Samuel turned on his heel and bolted into the night, disappearing into the shadows. The bounty hunters didn't hesitate. They surged forward, grabbing Annabelle by the arms, dragging her toward the door. No, Elias roared, springing forward. But it was too late. The bounty hunters had her, and Samuel had already betrayed them. In the chaos, Elias heard a shout from behind him. He turned, and in the dim light of the cabin, he saw one of the bounty hunters fall to the floor, blood pouring from his side. A figure stood in the doorway, cloaked in shadow. A long knife glinted in the firelight. It was Rafik. You're working with him? Elias gasped, his voice breaking with disbelief. Rafik's eyes were cold, unreadable. I didn't have a choice. When Samuel came to me with an offer, I couldn't refuse. You're both traitors. Elias yelled, fury rising in his chest. Rafik didn't flinch. No, we're survivors. And so are you. But if you want to save her, you'll have to make a choice. Elias's mind raced. His options were slipping away with every passing second. He could chase after Samuel, demand his loyalty, exact his revenge. Or he could sacrifice his own vengeance, face down the bounty hunters, and fight for Annabelle's freedom. He glanced at Annabelle, her eyes wide with fear, her hands trembling. And in that moment, Elias knew. Revenge was no longer the answer. What mattered was her life, her future, the child she carried. The only way out now was sacrifice. Let her go. Elias shouted at the bounty hunters, his voice raw with desperation. But they didn't listen. The ambush had only just begun, and Elias had a choice to make. One that would decide not just their fate, but the fate of everything he had fought for. The night was still, but the air was thick with the scent of danger. The bounty hunters had her. Annabelle, the woman Elias loved, the mother of his unborn child. And now, he was running, racing against time itself to save her. Each step he took felt heavier, his boots pounding against the hard earth. Every breath burned in his chest. His body screamed for rest, but there was no time. They were close now, so close to the edge of the world. But it didn't matter. He couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. Elias had always known the road would lead him here, to a moment when survival would demand everything of him. And yet, he hadn't fully understood what that meant until now. Betrayed by Samuel. Trapped by the bounty hunters. It wasn't just about running anymore. It was about breaking free, about reclaiming everything they'd stolen from him, from Annabelle. He had to find her. The landscape around him was unfamiliar, barren, and cruel. The mountains loomed in the distance, jagged and unforgiving, and the road ahead wound through a forest of dead trees, places where hope could easily get lost. There was no refuge in sight, no safe place to hide, no one to help. Tom was running out. Every glance behind him, every crack of a twig beneath his feet made his heart skip a beat. He could feel them getting closer, the bounty hunters, closing in from all sides. Every moment spent in the woods was a moment wasted. Annabelle was slipping farther and farther from him, her captors gaining ground. As the night stretched on, Elias's thoughts spiraled. He knew he had to act fast, to move faster. He had no plan, no clear way of finding Annabelle, but he would follow the sound of the wind, the sound of her voice, wherever it took him. If he couldn't save her, what was the point of any of it? But it wasn't just Annabelle. As Elias pushed forward, there was a deeper, more fundamental shift happening inside of him. His drive, his need to save her, was no longer just about love. It was about justice, about standing up to a system that had enslaved him and countless others for too long. He was no longer a fugitive, running for his life. He was a man with a mission, and he would not back down. His thoughts turned dark as the reality of their situation weighed on him. If he failed, if he couldn't stop the bounty hunters, if they reached her first, there would be no future, no hope. Annabelle's life would be sold away, and the child inside her would grow up in the shadow of this broken world. Every second mattered now. Every heartbeat felt like it was counting down to the final moment. The trees ahead opened up to reveal a clearing, and in the distance, Elias saw the flickering light of a campfire. His heart skipped. Could it be? He moved toward it, every muscle in his body coiled and ready for whatever awaited him. The closer he got, the more his senses sharpened. The firelight flickered against his skin, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts in the night. He could hear voices now, muffled, but close. The bounty hunters must be camped nearby, waiting for the night to pass before they resumed their hunt. Elias crouched low, his breathing shallow, his hand wrapped tightly around the hilt of his knife. He couldn't afford to make a sound. He had no choice but to get close, close enough to see where they were holding Annabelle. He couldn't waste any more time. He had to act now. As he neared the fire, Elias heard a voice, a soft whisper cutting through the stillness. It was Annabelle. Her voice, faint but unmistakable. She was still alive. His heart leapt in his chest, but it quickly turned to ice. The voice he heard wasn't just Annabelle's. There was another, deeper voice, one that he knew too well. Samuel. The realization hit him like a wave. Samuel was with them. He was the one who had orchestrated this. He had played Elias like a fool. He hadn't just betrayed them. He had led them into the very trap they'd been running from. Everything was falling apart. Elias's legs shook with fury, but he couldn't stop now. He couldn't let Annabelle down. The fire ahead flickered one last time, and the first hint of dawn broke through the night sky. Time was running out. Elias's eyes narrowed as he realized that the final choice had arrived. Revenge? Justice? Or would he be forced to make the ultimate sacrifice for the woman he loved? The world seemed to stretch out before him, every path dangerous, every decision leading to a new unknown. But he would fight. He would do whatever it took. The countdown had begun. The final journey had begun. And nothing, no one, could stop him now. The world was on fire. Elias's pulse hammered in his ears as he stood just beyond the campfire's reach, the flickering light casting long shadows on the cold earth. He could hear Annabelle's voice, faint and trembling, calling out. But she wasn't just calling to him. She was calling to the world, to anyone who could hear her, pleading for freedom. And as the sound of her desperation cut through the night, it drove Elias forward with a burning fury that drowned out everything else. He moved in, silently, through the brush, every instinct screaming at him to stay hidden. But the closer he got, the more the tension built inside him. Samuel's voice was unmistakable, low and calm, like a snake coiling around its prey. You should have known, Elias. There was never a choice. Not for you, not for her. You were always going to lose. Samuel's voice rang out, cold and mocking, in the stillness of the camp. Elias froze. His hands clenched into fists. Samuel had betrayed him, not just for power or money, but because he enjoyed it. He enjoyed seeing Elias suffer. This was the endgame. Without a second thought, Elias dashed from the trees, heart pounding in his chest. The moment he stepped into the clearing, he felt the air shift. Samuel's eyes locked onto him, a sick smile curling on his lips. Well, Samuel said, his voice dripping with amusement. The runaway slave has come to play hero. But you're too late. I've already won. Annabelle was bound to a tree nearby, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear, but also with hope. Elias saw her, saw the child growing inside her, and something snapped inside of him. This wasn't just about vengeance. It was about love. It was about a future, a family. But Samuel wasn't alone. The bounty hunters stood by the fire, ready for anything, watching him like wolves ready to strike. Elias took a step forward, every inch of him trembling with fury. "Release her, Samuel. This ends now." Samuel's grin only widened. "You never understood, did you? You think this is about you. But it's not. This is about survival, about winning, about power. And you? You're nothing. Just a slave who got lucky." A cruel laugh followed, echoing through the night. Samuel's hand went to the gun holstered at his side, fingers brushing it, but Elias was faster. In one fluid motion, he pulled the knife from his belt and hurled it toward Samuel. It sank deep into his side with a sickening thud, but it wasn't enough. Samuel staggered but didn't fall. He turned with a growl, pulling the gun from his side. "Fool," he spat, pain seeping into his voice. "You're too late. You'll always be too late." As Samuel raised the weapon, Elias lunged. Time slowed. His body moved on instinct. Gunshots rang out, shattering the night, but they didn't hit their mark. Elias was on Samuel, fists flying, each punch driven by rage and love, each blow feeling like it might tear the world apart. He needed to break him. He needed to stop him. In that moment, Elias felt the weight of everything he'd lost, everything he'd fought for. His past, his chains, his fear, they all collided, and for the first time, he fought not just to survive, but to live, to have a future, to protect Annabelle, to protect what mattered. Samuel finally collapsed, his hand still gripping the gun, but too weak to aim. Elias stood over him, panting, bloodied and breathless. Annabelle's voice broke through the silence, soft but filled with terror. "Elias, look out." Before Elias could turn, one of the bounty hunters lunged. He grabbed Elias by the arm, dragging him to the ground. Elias struggled, but his strength was waning. The man raised his knife, eyes wild, ready to strike. But then, in a flash of motion, a shot rang out. The bounty hunter fell, crumpling to the dirt with a look of shock frozen on his face. Annabelle, wide-eyed and shaking, held the gun in her hand, her hands trembling as she aimed it at the ground. She had saved him, but the real battle wasn't over. Elias's gaze shot to the horizon. In the distance, he could hear more footsteps, more men coming. They weren't safe yet. Annabelle's hands were still trembling as she took a step toward Elias, her voice shaky. "What now? We're not safe here. It's not over." Elias looked at her, her fear, her strength, the child growing inside her. For the first time, he understood what it meant to choose, what it meant to fight for something bigger than himself. His answer was quiet, but resolute. "We run. We fight. Together. And we never stop." The world was still burning, but Elias could see a flicker of hope through the flames. For Annabelle, for their child, for their future. And he would fight for that future, even if it meant paying the ultimate price. The dust of the battlefield had barely settled when Elias and Annabelle stood side by side, staring out at the horizon. The world was quiet now, save for the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. The chaos, the bloodshed, it felt like a distant memory. But the scars, physical and emotional, would stay with them forever. Elias's body was bruised, battered from the fight, but it was the quiet strength in Annabelle's eyes that steadied him now. She had fought beside him, her hands trembling but resolute, and now they stood together in the aftermath. There was nothing left but the road ahead. The campfire that had once illuminated the face of their enemies now flickered weakly, a ghost of its former self. Samuel was dead, his treachery no longer a shadow over their lives, but the cost had been high. There would be no easy peace, no return to the way things once were. But in the ruins of everything they had lost, there was still hope. Annabelle turned toward Elias, her eyes soft but filled with a new fire. The weight of what they had gone through was written on her face, on every line of her expression. She was no longer just the frightened bride who had been forced into a life she didn't choose. She was stronger now. She was his equal. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Elias took her hand, squeezing it gently. You haven't lost me, Annabelle. Not now. Not ever. But the reality of their situation was inescapable. They couldn't stay. The bounty hunters were gone, but they had left their mark. There were still enemies who wouldn't rest until they had captured them, claimed the reward for their heads, and erased everything they had built. Elias knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but there was no other choice now. Together, they had survived. Together, they would rebuild. As the two of them walked away from the smoldering remnants of the camp, the sun began to rise, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange. It felt like the dawn of a new beginning. They would face the road ahead, whatever dangers it might bring, and they would do it as one. There would be no turning back, no more running. Annabelle, now more than just a bride, but a woman of purpose, glanced up at Elias, a small but determined smile on her lips. We're free, Elias. For the first time in my life, I'm free. And for the first time in his life, Elias felt it too. A heavy weight had lifted from his chest. He had fought for his freedom, for the woman he loved, and for the future they would create together. There were no guarantees, but as he looked at Annabelle, he knew one thing with certainty. There was nothing he wouldn't do to protect what they had. As they continued their journey, the landscape before them seemed endless, the possibilities infinite. They would move on, always one step ahead, always vigilant, but for the first time, they would do so on their own terms. They would live, they would love, and they would build something that couldn't be torn down. But there were whispers, rumors still drifting in the wind, of a runaway slave and a pregnant bride who had defied the odds. Their story, their love, their fight, it would not be forgotten. In time, their legend would grow, a tale of survival, sacrifice, and the enduring power of love. And though the future remained uncertain, the echoes of their journey would last far longer than the silence of that dawn.